talk. So one of the things I might like to mention is that the Autry Fellow is a special person to the chorale. Over the years, we've had some really fantastic people, and one of them was a lady whose name I can't remember, but she was one that was a teacher at Amherst, and she gave a wonderful talk, and she also wrote an article in my brand book. I published brand book number 23, and all of the Autry Fellows have been really interesting people, and I'd like to say how much I appreciate the Autry members here for being here tonight, because the Autry is our sister organization of Western Americana. And so tonight we have the wonderful opportunity of hearing the Autry Fellow for 2026, and she is going to talk about not only Route 66, but other highways, and especially from a more academic point of view, am I right? And it's not just the fancy ideas, it's, you know, your parents, like my parents came across the United States from Chicago in 1947, just before I was born, and they took Route 66. It's not like that, but it's the history of the different highways and the opening of these highways, etc. So I'd like you to please help me welcome Ms. Lauren White to present the talk on Route 66 and the other highways.
Thank you so much for being here, and special thanks to the Autry Museum and to the Westerners for funding my research at the Autry. I'm really excited to share my work with all of you today. So this project is is my dissertation. I'm finishing up my PhD at USC. So my dissertation is on the political aesthetics of the freeway in the American West. It aims to further our understanding of the relationship between the highway and storytelling, so making visible the ideological work of the freeway, as well as its role in shaping national imaginaries and building the imagined West. So I want to start by talking about the Great American Road Trip. So to celebrate 250 years of America and 100 years of Route 66, the U.S. Department of Transportation is promoting the Great American Road Trip, which they call a nationwide storytelling initiative. This is the logo over on the right that the Department of Transportation created in partnership with America 250. The campaign is designed to commemorate road trips and their enduring symbol of the American experience. The campaign states that Route 66 launched the American road trip, a dream filled with freedom and discovery, and that Route 66 is more than a highway. They argue it's a living symbol of America's pioneering spirit. The campaign encourages families to hit the highways of America, suggesting destination stops that allow tourists to, quote, relive the old frontier, visit monuments of American leaders, and take photos with symbols of westward expansion like the Gateway Arch. The campaign has also funded a Great American Road Trip for U.S. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, his wife, and their 9 children, which was filmed and produced as a high-quality YouTube video series. In the promo video, Duffy argues that taking a road trip in America isn't just a vacation, it's a civic experience. Many people found Duffy's road trip to be tone-deaf in the midst of surging gas prices and potentially unethical, as the Duffy family was gifted flights, hotel stays, gas, a cruise, whitewater rafting, snowmobiling, skiing, and more by corporate sponsors regulated by Duffy's department. As a result of the backlash, the YouTube series has yet to air, but they insist it is coming soon. For the Great American Road Trip campaign, the Department of Transportation has also enlisted Brand USA to sell the already popular American road trip abroad. Road trips rank among the top 4 desired experiences for tourists visiting the States. Brand USA was created by Congress in 2010 to serve as the official destination marketing organization for America. Brand USA has not only been helping international tourists plan road trip itineraries for trips to the US, they have also been organizing road trips in other countries that allow potential tourists to experience the spirit of America while traveling on their own roads, suggesting that there is a distinctly American way to take a road trip. This campaign prompted me to ask why taking a road trip as an American is a civic experience rather than a vacation. Why, as Sean Duffy puts it, is there nothing more American than a road trip? At its core, my project seeks to understand the importance of the highway to US nationalism and American identity, as well as how the West has been mythologized through its highways and vice versa. In this presentation, I'll analyze advertising campaigns, patriotic movements, and state-produced highway dedication ceremonies. I'm going to start by sharing the beginnings of my research on Route 66 and the Lincoln Highway, which are the primary focus for my research fellowship at the Autry Museum. But I'm only 3 days into my fellowship, so I'll spend more time in this talk talking about the dedication ceremonies. So to begin, I want to look at Route 66, which I know many of you have memories with or family stories passed down about. I'm interested in how Route 66 has been mythologized and how the state has capitalized on that mythologization. Route 66 was formed as part of the 1926 National Highway System, but lost its status as a highway in 1985, a move that some argue caused Route 66 to shift from road to relic. As evidenced by the Great American Road Trip campaign language, it continues to be thought of as a highway. Route 66 was not America's earliest highway, nor its longest, nor does it link the biggest cities. However, it became a driving force in promoting westward expansion, tourism to the Southwest, and a shared cultural heritage. It was designed to be driven east to west, as supported by the signs marking its beginning and end. While Chicago holds a sign marking the route's beginning, Santa Monica only has a sign marking the end of the trail. Route 66 linked together a system of roads that allowed people to travel greater distances by automobile for business and leisure via a set route that could be experienced at one's own pace, lending itself to the rise in popularity of the American road trip, which became the leading vacation in the 1950s. It was first conceived of as a marketing aid to promote good roads and state tourism. It has been described as a linear community for, by, and of the people, featuring souvenir trading posts, national and state parks, monuments, and other roadside attractions. It is a subject or setting of countless novels, films, songs, stories, and nonfiction books. Route 66 became one of the best known and most identifiable highways in the world. As one of the most influential myth-making sources of the American West, it has become a historic cultural resource that America seeks to preserve. Okay, now I went too far back. Okay. In 1990, the US Congress passed the Route 66 Study Act, recognizing that Route 66, quote, had become a symbol of the American people's heritage of travel and their legacy of seeking a better life. The legislation resulted in a National Park Service Route 66 Special Resource Study designed to evaluate the significance of the road in American history and to identify options for its preservation, interpretation, and use. This study led in turn to the 1999 Route 66 Corridor Preservation Act that created a program to promote and stimulate research about Route 66 and preserve its literature, manuscripts, audiovisual materials, and especially its oral histories. The program is also responsible for identifying and preserving historic Route 66 resources, including, quote, motels, gas stations, road segments, and cultural landscapes. Because of my focus on Indigenous studies, I wanted to highlight one of these preserved resources, the Wigwam motels, which you can see on the left and also at the very bottom on the right. Inspired by a Long Beach, California restaurant, Frank Redford of Kentucky built a gas station convenience store in the shape of a teepee. The success of this gas station led him to open Wigwam motels along Route 66, which allowed guests to sleep in guest rooms that featured a paved pad to accommodate a car. The Wigwam Motel served as inspiration for the Cozy Cone Motel in Disney's 2006 animated movie Cars, as you can see on the right. The photo on the top is from the movie Cars, and the one on the bottom is of the Wigwam Motel. So the shape and the layout of the motel is the same. During its lifetime, Route 66 has guided travelers through the lands of more than 25 recognized tribal nations. The romance of Route 66 was created in part by marketing the Hollywood version of American Indians that relied on stereotypes. Travelers were given the stereotypical images they were accustomed to seeing in films to lure them into buying postcards and souvenirs, taking photos with wooden Indians, staying the night in a wigwam, and spending a little extra time and money while they were on the road on their journey west. These wigwams were evidence not of the tribe they were meant to represent, but of the highway's marketing that relied on a monolithic view of the American Indian. The Hollywood Indian made people comfortable traveling out west for vacation or to settle down. The mythologization of Indians and the West benefited its highways, tourism, and expansion, which in turn benefited the gas stations, hotels, and excursions that relied on these stereotypes to attract customers. For example, in 1926, businessman Ford Harvey launched the Indian Detours, an auto tour featuring, quote, Indian pueblos, ruins, and scenic points of interest along Route 66. These tours picked travelers up from the railroad in Harvey cars and brought them to an Indian tour guide dressed like a Hollywood Indian. On the right, you can see there's a picture of Albert Einstein on an Indian detour. These were very popular. There were a lot of famous people and even presidents that went on these Indian detours. The one that Albert Einstein is on took him to the Grand Canyon. Over time, the Fred Harvey Company found enormous success in the West, and no trip to the region was considered complete without one of these tours. The Harvey Company went on to open dozens of hotels and restaurants along the highway. These tours were crucial in getting people comfortable traveling on highways and Route 66 in particular. Route 66 serves as a great example to the extent to which a highway can mythologize the West and gain meaning far beyond its technical function. The next highway that I want to turn to is the Lincoln Highway, which was strategically infused with meaning by its creators. The Lincoln Highway, which was the first transcontinental highway, was ascribed with patriotic messaging in an effort to sell its construction. Made up of automobile industrialists as well as Thomas Edison, former President Theodore Roosevelt, and then President Woodrow Wilson, the Lincoln Highway Association turned their campaign into a nationwide patriotic movement, freely admitting that their, quote, primary materials were politics, publicity, and propaganda, arguing that these are the materials of an American highway, rather than crushed rock and concrete. The association sought to immortalize Abraham Lincoln through a useful and enduring memorial. They described the Lincoln Highway, named in memory of the great emancipator, as the emancipator which would free the farmer from the thraldom of bad roads, and further argued that the name was symbolic, as, quote, the road and the automobile have emancipated man from provincialism. The association was aware of the value of publicity and relied heavily on newspapers to do its heavy lifting. They didn't want the Lincoln Highway relegated to the automobile section of the newspaper, so they tried to make the Lincoln Highway fit into the news cycles. For example, one example that I found was when the Panama Canal was in the news cycle, they wrote articles comparing the cost of the canal to the cost of the Lincoln Highway. They also used these articles to highlight what the government wanted to stress at any given moment. Remember, like, the association also included the active president. So if they wanted a story about national defense, they would ask the Lincoln Highway writers to write a story about national defense. Or oftentimes they would underscore, quote, the function of highways in creating national solidarity. One of these article writers, the association's vice president, wrote over 1,000 words every day for over 10 years, tying the highway to Western roads, the Pony Express, sports games, and more. The association wrote, quote, there never was a road in whose behalf the spotlights of propaganda were burned so brightly. They enlisted the help of companies throughout the country, especially those in the automobile industry, asking them to decorate their places of business with American flags, their personal Lincoln Way flags, and portraits of Lincoln. The association leaders called for a nationwide celebration on the day of the highway's dedication, asking each state executive along the route to proclaim the day of the highway dedication, which was Halloween, a legal holiday, and call on the citizens to participate in its celebration. And then this is the part that I find the most interesting. So the association also enlisted clergy across the nation to put up portraits of Lincoln in their churches and saturate their sermons with stories about Abraham Lincoln and the importance of monuments and the highway. They would then distribute copies of these sermons that all closed with endorsements like, quote, such a highway will be a most fitting and useful monument to the memory of Lincoln. They referred to this large network of churches as belonging to the Lincoln Highway faith. By memorializing Lincoln within their highway, the association successfully shifted public opinion, secured funding for the project, and underscored the benefits of monumentalizing infrastructure. The government considered the Lincoln Highway Association to be, quote, a great national utility. The Lincoln Highway Association was a part of the larger Good Roads movement that advocated for the creation of new highways. The Lincoln Highway provided the Good Roads movement with direction by propounding a single definite concrete objective. And then this is actually something I found the other day at the Autry that I thought was interesting. This is also from the Good Roads movement. It's from the Daughters of the American Revolution chapter. And so it's kind of hard to read, but it says, the Old Trails Road, the National Highway, a memorial to the pioneer men and women, a suggestion of the Good Roads Committee, Daughters of the American Revolution.
Yay. That's 1911.
Yes, this is 1911. So they were advocating for linking roads to create a national highway that would serve as a memorial to pioneer men and women. They state that, quote, sentiment builds not only roads, it builds nations. As I'll show in the next section, this desire to monumentalize the highway and have it serve as a memorial to pioneers persisted for decades. And then the photo on the right, they also argued that the buffalo should be considered highway engineers because they stamped out old trails that were later turned into roads and highways. So they have this picture, it's kind of hard to see, but it's of a buffalo, and right below it the caption says, a highway engineer. It was really common for these movements to seek to naturalize the highway in the environment. So now I'm going to turn to Southern California Freeway dedication ceremonies. There is so much to talk about with these ceremonies, but I have a very particular focus for my talk. But I did want to point out a couple things real fast. Each one of these Southern California Freeway dedication ceremonies featured a beauty queen of the highway, and so they would crown a beauty queen even for really small interchanges. So there's lots of beauty queens of the highway. And then they also had very unique ribbon cuttings, even really high stakes ones. This is the one I always give as an example. So this is for the Antelope Valley Freeway dedication, and it's hard to see, but there's two beauty queens standing on each side holding a ribbon that was cut by a helicopter with two giant shears attached to it. So they were very over the top, unnecessarily dangerous. So I wanted to point out those things. I am most interested in the Western aesthetic that these ceremonies adopted in the 1930s to the 1950s. So I'm going to highlight a few of those ceremonies for you. So the history of Western-themed freeway dedication ceremonies begins with the Death Valley Highway that connected the highest point in the continental U.S., Mount Whitney, with the lowest point, Badwater Basin. So in 1937, Father Crowley, who is on the left in this image here, he was an Irish priest whose parish covered the length of the highway, and he was known locally as the Desert Padre. He pitched the idea of theming the ceremony around uniting water from the highest body of water with the lowest. Father Crowley was a self-described producer, actor, and publicist. He directed, developed, and even starred in many Southern California plays. Crowley was also an influential promoter of the area. When advocating for Inyo County, his primary objective was to improve the roads he spent so much of his time on. In fact, Father Crowley was so outspoken about the necessity of better roads and new highways in his Sage and Tumbleweed newspaper column that he was gifted a lifetime membership in the Automobile Club of Southern California. Father Crowley's unique influence over local politics, mixed with his storytelling ability, made him the ideal general chairman of the New Highways Dedication Ceremony Committee. This powerful committee was made up of the government, the press, the Automobile Club of Southern California, directors of other infrastructure projects, railroad executives, bank presidents, and bishops. California Governor Frank Merriman served as the president and spent 6 months helping the committee design a PR event to promote tourism, rebrand Owens Valley, and celebrate highways. So this is an image of like the promotional material that went out. So you can see at the top, Mount Whitney, Death Valley. It was, again, 3 days long. The ceremony took place over 3 days. And they had a very elaborate performance that also spanned all 3 days. So this elaborate transportation relay, quote, featured all the modes of transportation California has known. In this pageant designed to honor the pioneers of the mountains in Death Valley, water was carried in a ceremonial gourd etched with illustrations of the starting and ending points of the performance journey. When casting the roles, the committee sought out descendants of famous pioneers, as well as celebrities. Many Westerns were filmed in Lone Pine, which is right in this area, and many of the famous actors from these films were eager to return for the ceremony that promised to make history. The thousands of people who attended, yes, there were thousands, it was a very big event, were asked to participate by wearing costumes of the early days of the West. And then on the left in this picture, you can see the gourd that has like the etchings in it. There's a museum, I forgot the name of the museum, but it's over near Death Valley that has this gourd still. And actually, I also forgot the name of this TV show, I'll have to look it up, but they had a TV show like in the 90s that did like a recreation of this whole performance as like one of the episodes. That's also really interesting. So on Friday, October 29th, 1937, the gourd filled with water from Mount Whitney's Tulanio Lake began its 150-mile journey. The first form of transportation responsible for carrying the gourd was a, quote, Indian runner. Unlike the rest of the positions, the Indian runner role was determined by a 5-mile race held in Nevada, where Civilian Conservation Corps Indian Division enrollees ran to decide who would fill the gourd and carry it across the wilderness to begin the ceremony. Attendees waited anxiously on the highway as the winner, Jerry M., pictured on the right, carried the gourd across the first 14-mile stretch to a Pony Express rider. Father Crowley wrote that, quote, "The lack of a road to Teleno made the use of an Indian runner the most logical choice." I'm going to offer a little close reading of this choice. So the ceremony featured famed mountaineers, including Norman Clyde, who famously climbed Mount Whitney dozens of times and frequented Lake Teleno. Even Father Crowley himself, he considered himself an avid hiker and boasted about being the first priest to celebrate Mass at the top of Mount Whitney. Clearly, having a knowledge of the terrain and experience navigating Mount Whitney's hiking paths weren't important criteria for making this most logical choice. Otherwise, Clyde would have been chosen over a young indigenous man from Nevada with no relation to the land. Considering that Father Crowley specified that it was the lack of a road that influenced their decision, there appears to have been a conscious effort to distinguish between untouched nature and the road of progress. Father Crowley made clear that the place where the gourd was handed to the Pony Express rider was symbolic, writing that it marked, quote, "the end of the red man's domain, the terminus of the white man's highway," end quote. In this performance, the freeway serves as a border that denies the Indian entry to white modernity. Jerry M's run took place out of view, away from the spectacle. He was only visible to the attendees when he, quote, "burst from the thicket to pass off the gourd, after which he was instructed to remain at the wilderness highway border and watch as the Pony Express rider and trailing attendees took off down the road." As the transportation parade travels down the highway, Jerry M becomes a feature of the landscape rather than a participant. Figured within the trope of the vanishing or last of his tribe Indian, this choice positions Jerry M as existing outside of civilization. The barefoot Indian runner represents the human stripped of all modern progress. The Wedding of the Waters Committee positions the wilderness and the Indian runner as stable reference points from which the progress on the highway emerges. As the Stewart Indian School Band strummed a song from the mountain cliffs, Jerry M passed the gourd to the first of 3 Pony Express riders who brought the gourd to its resting place for the night, Lone Pines, Bank of America. With the help of Father Crowley, William Boyd, playing his famous cowboy character Hopalong Cassidy, which he's on the left, locked the gourd in the bank vault for safekeeping overnight. Each night, attendees enjoyed dinner while watching dramatic productions featuring Western movie stars. And then this is an interesting fact. California Governor Merriam was served a spoonful of the treasured water from the gourd each night. Kind of weird. The next morning, Governor Merriam retrieved the gourd from the bank vault and passed it off to a prospector who brought his burro to a covered wagon filled with the descendants of famous pioneers from the Jayhawker Party, the ill-fated Donner Party. Do you think I have? Yeah, I have a picture. This is a descendant from the Donner Party, and descendants from the Lost 49ers. The gourd was then passed to a 20-mule team, then a stagecoach, and finally to a train engineer. Sunday morning began with Father Crowley's, these are just some more pictures. That's the 20-mule team. This is the plane we'll get to, and then that's the train. Sunday morning began with Father Crowley's church services attended by 200 spectators dressed as 49ers and cowboys. Following the service, the gourd was passed from the train engineer to Louis Meyer, a famous American racing driver, who drove the gourd 25 miles to the dedication scene, where the committee had organized an improvised Western Union station along the highway. As the car arrived, precisely at 11:30 a.m., President Franklin D. Roosevelt pressed a telegraph key in Washington, whose click signaled 3 Los Angeles Police Department officers to shoot the ribbon open. Quote, "blasting open the highway in true Western fashion," as Father Crowley put it. As the ribbon fell, the Los Angeles Police Department band played the Star-Spangled Banner. The first airplane to ever land by the basin was the gourd's final mode of transportation. From the passenger seat of the Union Oil Company plane piloted by a World War I veteran, the superintendent of Death Valley National Monument emptied the gourd over Badwater Basin, concluding the symbolic wedding of the two waters. The grand finale of this 3-day performance was composed of a series of signal fires that symbolized the end of the ceremony and the beginning of, quote, the New West. Immediately after the gourd was emptied from the plane, signal fires were lit by the Boy Scouts of America, 30 miles back to Mount Whitney. From the summit, Norman Clyde lit the final fire. The Wedding of the Waters Committee asked, quote, descendants of the Indians who once lit similar flares as they watched the 49ers entering the valley to gather wood for these smoke signals. The method for signaling settler invasion into the region was repurposed in the ceremony to herald the completion of the settler infrastructure project. These indigenous laborers were never visible to the audience. By the end of the ceremony, the wilderness was no longer reserved for indigenous peoples as it was in the first act. Rather, it was opened up to settlers whose fires visually covered the space. When the attendees returned to the wilderness at the end of the ceremony, the Indians were nowhere to be seen, vanishing with, quote, the Old West. The Wedding of the Waters served as a blueprint for state-produced highway dedication ceremonies in the region that utilized frontier aesthetics to turn the highway into a symbol of state dominance. For example, in the summer of 1940, the state welcomed the first unit of what would become the Hollywood Freeway, with a performance featuring a similar history of transportation parade, featuring, quote, Indian runners, horseback riders, Butterfield stagecoaches, early and late model automobiles. B-Western star Tom Keene and Gene Autry cut a 35mm pictured ribbon to open the freeway, which is the picture on here. The Wedding of the Waters also inspired the Interstate 15 Barstow Freeway dedication that took place on December 13th, 1958. And this one spanned multiple states. This ceremony was designed to tell, quote, the story of progress from man to missile. The dedication committee, again made up of industry executives and government officials, wanted to highlight the progress of, quote, man's conquest of speed, starting with an Indian runner and ending with supersonic jet pilot Charles Yeager, who is pictured here. To transport a letter from the governor of California to the governor of Nevada, an Indian runner ran on the highway to a Barstow horseman who brought the letter to a stagecoach, an old-time automobile, a modern automobile, a helicopter, and finally a jet plane piloted by Yeager, the first man to break the sonic barrier in a plane. He was from Barstow, so I think that's why he wanted to participate. Accompanying Yeager on this record-breaking 13-minute flight, which I can't emphasize enough, because 13-minute flight from Victorville to Las Vegas, was a Barstow councilman, who's in the back, who carried the letter to Nevada's governor. Following the ribbon cutting for this ceremony, the 10,000 attendees were treated to lunch, followed by a parade. Quote, Indian runner Everett Poncho in loincloth and feather headband, who had first started the day's mail run, led the parade, followed by huge Army and Air Force carriers with a mounted tank and a mounted missile that climaxed the Mules and Missiles theme of the parade. The ceremony committee staged a holdup, casting famous Hollywood actors to play armed highwaymen who ambushed the stagecoach. Preston Foster, known for his combat dramas and westerns, served as the Grand Marshal of the ceremony, reminding guests that, quote, the new freeway was one more link in the great chain which would eventually cover the nation. The banquet was attended by industry executives, government officials, famous Western actors, and descendants of Barstow pioneers who dressed the part and were seated at a special pioneers table. Guests were encouraged to attend church service the following morning at the First Methodist Church of Barstow, where the pastor delivered a sermon describing the Word of God as the greatest freeway toward abundant living, merging the story of God and the story of America with the story of the freeway. To prepare for this freeway opening, the ceremony committee had a history marker recreated, which you can see here, that the bottom portion is not all visible, but this featured a New desert scene depicting a prospector and burro on one side and wreckage from a wagon alongside the skull of a steer in the foreground, meant to, quote, symbolize the hardships of the pioneers. Above the scene was a list of pioneers, which you can see on here, who used this route and what is supposed to be an opened Bible that reads, quote, you are now traveling the Old Mojave Trail, a natural riverbed highway, first used by Indians on the move, thereafter used continually by Mormons, immigrants, fortune seekers, freighters, military expeditions, and sightseeing tourists. Using the Bible to tell the story renders the settling of the land and the erecting of this highway as providential. And this marker was where the ceremony ribbon cutting took place. In this ceremony, the missile and the freeway are represented as the same endpoint in settler temporal developmentalist framework. Moreover, all these state-produced ceremonies were created in partnership with the press, the church, and the military, as well as with the utility, movie, banking, and transportation industries. Settler institutions converged to create and monumentalize these highways that in turn helped them build intertwined power. The collaboration between the government, Hollywood, and the church in particular illustrates the co-constructive nature of storytelling and ideology in America. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the Arroyo Seco Parkway dedication, which featured a performance that wasn't advertised as a performance that I want to unpack. So during my research, I was struck by this image from the Arroyo Seco Parkway dedication on December 30th, 1940. So newspapers and scholarships on the image described it as the Director of Public Works on the right, smoking a peace pipe with Chief Tahachi on the left, after he, quote, formally relinquished the Arroyo to the state's highway department. So I present Chief Tahachi as a case study for examining how the state, in collaboration with Hollywood, portrayed the freeway as Indian given, building on the popular myth that Indians willingly gifted or sold their land. The Arroyo Seco ceremony organizers sought to, quote, narrate a history of the Arroyo Seco Parkway from the days when the Arroyo Seco was an Indian trail up to the present, end quote. However, they were struggling to find a way to do so until just 10 days before the ceremony, when they came across newspaper headlines describing Chief Tahachi as, quote, the first Indian chief in history to invite white men to witness the christening of his son. The ceremony organizers attended the christening, which took place at Chief Tahachi's home, and were shocked to hear that Tahachi's people had lived in the Arroyo Seco for centuries, including 118-year-old Chief Silvas, who Tahachi claimed grew up in the Arroyo before their tribe was forced onto the reservation in the mountains. Tahachi shared that he was serving as the current leader because Silva's health had declined with old age. While Tahachi promised to extend the invitation to Silvas, he returned from the reservation the following day with the news Chief Silvas had died from the flu overnight. Chief Tahachi requested a separate pre-ceremony so that, quote, his people could express their appreciation of modern progress as exemplified by the Arroyo Seco Parkway, converted from a wilderness into a highway of beauty and economic value. And that quote and all these other quotes come from newspapers. This pre-ceremony, co-organized by Tahachi and the state, would begin the night before the opening of the first freeway in the West. Chief Tahachi, along, quote, 200 Indians, were to sleep in the Arroyo Seco for the last time before relinquishing all their rights to California's governor, the, quote, white father at Sacramento, end quote. By laying claim to land ceded in a public ceremony from Indians dressed in the style of the Plains Warrior popularized by Wild West shows, the state legitimized dispossession in the name of American progress. Chief Tahachi promised the attendance of hundreds of Kawis at the pre-ceremony, and despite there being no such tribe, he was able to provide Native American extras for his big day because he was a well-connected Hollywood actor. So while newspapers lauded the friendly relations between local Native Americans and government officials, the celebrated ceding of the land was a fabrication. There was no Chief Silvas, and Chief Tahachi was Jeff Davis Seipert, who the picture on the left, he's obviously on the right, and then in the picture on the right, he's the man on the far left. He was an Arkansas man who moved to California for the film industry, and he was likely not Indian at all. Seipert made the journey to Los Angeles as a teenager, where he met his first wife, Dorothy Teeters, who's on the left here, who later went by Princess Neowana of the Cherokees and was also likely plain Indian. Seipert began performing as a vaudeville contortionist with the stage name Chief Buffalo Nickel. It is important to note that Indigenous actors during this time also participated in red-facing, as they were forced into roles constructed around Hollywood's fantastical, romanticized representation of Indians, which made it easier for pretend Indians or pretendians to appear legitimate. Seipert went on to snag minor acting roles. Director Roland Sturgeon is credited with encouraging him to adopt the stage name Chief Tahachi. In the process of physically becoming a Hollywood Indian, Seipert and his wife began wearing leather and feather regalia in their daily life. Seipert learned the lingo, spirituality, and aesthetics of what Robert Burkhofer calls the white man's Indian. His caricatured image invoked the visual markers of the stereotypical Plains Indian. The familiarity of the Hollywood Indian allowed Seipert to construct a native persona by simply mimicking the characters he portrayed on screen. Before the Arroyo Seco Parkway dedication, Seipert was a relatively unknown actor who had only made one public appearance as Chief Tahachi, apart from the christening of his son. At both the christening and the Arroyo Seco Parkway ceremony, Chief Tahachi was widely reported to be Chief of the Kawies, Kawies. However, when Seipert debuted as Chief Tahachi 4 months earlier, he claimed to be Cherokee. This appearance was at a Mormon church, where Seipert gave a talk on Indian religion and spiritualism versus superstition. In an advertisement for the talk, he is described as, quote, full-blooded Cherokee and acting leader of 1,000 to 1,700 persons, end quote. Just 6 months later, Chief Tahachi shared his Indian philosophy at a different event and described himself as Chief of the Kawies, of which, quote, there are but 7 members left. Chief Tahachi identified himself as the chief of nearly a dozen different tribes throughout his career. Despite publishing 4 books as Chief Tahachi of the Kawies tribe, he is most often referred to and remembered as an old settler Cherokee. According to his youngest son, Chief Tahachi would respond to questions about his name with, didn't you know? Everyone is a chief in Hollywood. It's a land of make-believe. Indeed, many of Seipert's friends were also in the business of pretending to be Indian, including Iron Eyes Cody, who was the godfather to Tahachi's son. Like Iron Eyes Cody, Chief Tahachi played an Indian on and off screen, but unlike his friend, Chief Tahachi became most known for his work outside of filmmaking. Chief Tahachi's career was founded on self-indigenization and self-mythologization. His 15 minutes of fame as the man who relinquished the Arroyo Seco came to define the rest of his life. The state's attempt to rewrite history by passing off a choreographed counterfeit performative treaty as an official land relinquishing legitimized Chief Tahachi's identity and made him a local legend. Throughout his career, Seipert carried around scrapbooks with newspaper clippings confirming that he had, in fact, once ceded the Arroyo Seco. He used this credibility to perpetuate the publishing of self-aggrandizing narratives in the press. Seipert fabricated details of his personal life to boost his lore. In some of the most outrageous examples, he claimed to be both a direct descendant of King Montezuma and a nephew to the celebrated Indian princess Ramona, tying his character to other mythologized figures. In another particularly absurd example, he claimed that his tribe spoke the same language as indigenous people in Tibet, where he claimed to be the only outsider to receive an invitation from the High Lama of Tibet. Seipert's efforts to stay visible in the press were rewarded with many paid public appearances. He was a frequent guest on local radio and news shows, sometimes appearing alongside Iron Eyes Cody. He was even a guest on the Betty White Show, where he shared Cherokee customs and traditions in 1950. Seibert was asked to camp out in a teepee at UCLA during their homecoming week, and he was paid to assist with the development of Los Angeles equestrian trails because he was, quote, well versed in the history of the various routes. He frequently entertained guests at the Los Angeles Breakfast Club, and he eventually became known locally as the Wrath Indian after he became the representative mascot of Wrath Packing Company, known for its ham, which this is an advertisement on here. So he did weekly meet and greets at local grocery stores around Los Angeles, and his cartoon images were used to advertise this meat company sponsorship throughout Southern California. His career depended on the white people who viewed him as an authority on Indian culture, some of whom wanted permission to play Indian themselves. Chief Tahachi made many white men honorary members of his tribe, including Walter Knott of Knott's Berry Farm. And so you can see on here, that's from that day. And the certificate that Seibert gifted Knott, as well as other artifacts, are actually still on display at the Western Trails Museum at Knott's Berry Farm. Which I think I have. Oh wait, I went too far. Hopefully it'll come back.
Do you need me to then? Oh.
Okay, there we go. So this is what some of the things that are on display at the museum at Knott's Berry Farm. So you can see at the top, it's a certificate from October 17, 1941, and it's lists the name, the Indian name that he gives Walter Knott, and it's signed from Chief Tahachi, and then there's like a little poem at the end about the great spirit. So Seibert created an archive in conjunction with the alternative history he was creating for his fabricated tribe, turning his home into a museum of sorts. He frequently described himself to reporters as, quote, an authority on Indian culture, arts and crafts, and an interpreter of Indian lore. His desire to be an archaeological authority on Native American relics led to staged discoveries of ancient objects he claimed belonged to his people. So like he would tell the press he was going to go look for ancient relics at this park, and then he would discover one and it would go into the news, and then he would try to sell it at his house. So these relics that he would discover on these staged excursions became like historical objects that he then sold to people. His role in the Arroyo Seco Parkway dedication gave him the power to give away land and create a larger-than-life persona. He used the stereotypical Hollywood Indian to turn himself into a spiritual guardian and cultural artifact. As Angelenos faced displacement and dispossession at the hands of freeway developers, Chief Tahachi's perceived willingness to gift land after experiencing displacement made him a role model for making sacrifices in the name of modern progress. Chief Tahachi represented the idea that indigenous people could have agency at a time when there was very little to be found. Furthermore, as a natural environmental steward, his support for the development of the Arroyo Seco into a freeway assuaged environmental concerns. I can't definitively say that the freeway ceremony organizers were completely unaware that the chief that they selected for the Arroyo Seco Parkway ceremony was not a descendant of the Native Americans who once lived in the Arroyo Seco. Regardless, they were culpable for staging the performative relinquishing of indigenous land in the first place. They pretended to formally accept the land ceded through Tahachi's ceremony, knowing that it was all fake. Their freeway building required no such relinquishing, despite how they misrepresented the facts to the press they invited to the publicity stunt. This elaborate performance reenacted land dispossession by settlers through a staged treaty with a man with no ties to the space who went on to make a living playing the Indian who gifted the arroyo. Ultimately, this ceremony rendered the freeway Indian given. By infusing the freeway with the tropes of the Western and featuring ceremonial reenactments of westward expansion and land dispossession, Southern Southern California freeway dedications consecrated the freeway as a monument to settler colonialism. By monumentalizing the freeway, with the help of Hollywood, churches, and industry executives, the state strengthened the American highways' capacity to perform ideological work. An analysis of these highways offers a way of seeing more clearly the extent to which the highway has been mythologized in service of America. Thank you.
Where did you hear that pronunciation? See, I'm from New England. There they were called wigwam. Like a H-A-A-M. It's an Algonquin word mispronounced by Englishmen, later mispronounced by Americans. Wigwam.
You know, I tried to look it up, and then I actually just asked my husband right before it went on about it, so thank you. You're probably right.
More than likely. Now, with the automobiles, there's a train and a car. That train, Slim Princess, very unique train.
In Tibet, it's big land.
And then the car that they carried that water in was an incredibly unique vehicle for the day. I believe it was a Lincoln Zephyr,
Yes.
which was like the luxury apex thing
And it was the first
that
one
Lincoln could
to
make.
be in California.
Yeah, it was really quite unique, very special.
It was the 1938 version, so it was the next year, and it had it.
What was the background identity of Jerry M., the Indian runner who carried the gourd on the first leg of the Mount Whitney to Death Valley highway dedication?
Yeah,
What was his story?
I don't know like a whole lot about his story just because it didn't come up a lot in the newspapers. But he went to the Stewart Indian boarding school, and then he went on to be a part of the Conservation Corps, and that's how he participated in the run.
Okay. And
I
what?
think he was a Paiute from Lone Pine.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know that he was from Lone Pine though.
No, associated with.
Yeah. And one last question. In the picture with Chuck Yeager in the, I guess, I think it was the, well, if you go back, was that a dog on top of his head? Because was I seeing that picture correctly?
I don't think so.
Good What dog?
You know, I think it's part of the plane.
Yes. So is that part of the cockpit?
There's no.
Oh, because it looks like a bulldog sitting on top of his head.
I have no idea.
Okay, all
And I
right.
don't have very good vision.
Okay, maybe I'm just seeing things, but am I the only one?
Well, you can see it now, but I think it's just the angle.
Okay.
So,
It's not a dog.
so I have a question. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned the Royal Cedar Parkway and Hollywood Freeway or whatever it was. I thought the Pasadena Freeway was the first freeway. My question really is, when did these roads become a quote freeway? Or were they just highways?
So like the distinction between highways and freeways is just that a highway has stops, like some sort of interruptions, and a freeway does not. So if you're on a freeway, you'll never have like a stop sign or an intersection or something. So it just depends on like if the route at whatever time had one of these intersections or stops.
So, but the Arroyo Seco didn't have stops.
Correct, it was the first freeway. And I think
Yeah.
the first
Yeah, that's why
freeway-
it was marketed as like the West first freeway.
So then all the other ones became freeways because they had no stops.
Later, they took the stops out and
Yeah.
became throughways. First, they were called throughways, then they called them freeways.
In the Hollywood freeway dedication ceremony that took place like 6 months before the Royal Cycle Parkway, that one wasn't considered the West First Freeway because it was only one segment of it that was complete at that time. It was another couple years for.
One other comment about that, my understanding is the Pennsylvania Turnpike was the first highway like that, throughway, but it was a toll road. And when they built the Pasadena Freeway, that was a
free.
So it was free in 2 cents. And no stops, and you didn't have to pay for it.
Yes, I wanted to find out how did we find any of those plays written by Father Crowley? That sounds fascinating.
So there's a book, it's by Joan Brooks. If you look up Father Crowley or like the Desert Padre, I think the name of the book is actually the Desert Padre. She like went through an archive and found like all of his notes, and much of the book is really just like his own writings. And he details some of these plays and different things in that book.
Okay, thanks. On your initial picture, and if John, if you would get back to the initial picture, can you describe what's going on in that picture? That one.
Oh, yeah, so this is actually, is it still up at the Audrey?
I think it is still installed, but it's a James Doolan painting.
This
And I
one's-
cannot remember the name of it.
It's titled Bridges.
channel or some kind, like a channel or something.
He often
Still life with
painted
all
Freeway.
Where it's kind of,
I can't remember where this is.
I feel like it's.
That's getting on the five.
Somewhere.
The freeway somewhere here. It's getting on the five off the harbor. I think it's where, it's where the 511.
Yeah, I think it's the final one.
Channel line.
So that's actually an area with all those bridges together, not a compilation of different bridges that he put together in a picture?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a photograph?
He often did a photograph of the
It's
network.
painted, okay, thank you.
Oh, I have a question. The symbolism of the water coming from the north and ending up in Southern California is fascinating. And I don't think that's what they were meant to do, but the whole idea of where the California water comes from is like so, it's like completely on the nose, but I thought that was just like, what? Yeah, we do get our water from other places. So I wonder, again, probably assigning too much meaning to it, but it was a curious choice to commemorate the opening of a freeway by bringing some water.
Wait, I think too that, I think water was on the brain, because like the water diversions from Golden Valley.
Really off of that.
But it is funny, I didn't include this note, but like the people who were there said like the water never actually reached the bottom, like dissipated right after they like poured it out of the airplane.
As far as the Pasadena freeway, so when it was dedicated and they had the Hollywood Indian chief involved, in the local papers, was this really, were they telling the public that this actually was deeded by the Indians? Because all that land was owned by, right-of-ways and so on were owned by different people. So they were basically just hoodwinking the public.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting. One great story about the freeway that I've heard is that a lot of the right-of-way was owned by the Dobbins family. Horace Dobbins tried to build an elevated bicycle way. Well, he built it partly. He didn't finish it. He only built it to South Pasadena, but it was supposed to go from the Raymond Hotel in Pasadena, the Green Hotel in Pasadena, down to the Raymond Hotel in South Pasadena, and then along the exact path of the freeway. But he was building an elevated bicycle track in the 1890s. So I was always told that their family, they still had some of the rights, and they sold that to the state when they were building the freeway. Did you come across any of that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, everything that the state was saying with this pre-ceremony and how he seeded the land, it was all of that. It was completely fake. And that's actually what caused me to go down this rabbit hole. Was when I saw the picture, I was like, this isn't real, like that didn't happen, so.
Great, thank you.
Do you know what happened to Chief
Tahachi?
Tahachi?
Yeah, he spent the rest of his life being asked to go unfortunately, like dinosaurs have.
So he was never.
He has never been publicly talked about as not being.
Wow.
Lauren discovered this.
Wow.
One of the things could be said is the picture she showed of Iron Eyes Cody. Many of you know that Iron Eyes Cody was a member of this corral in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he was a significant photographer and quite a big buff.
So he was also a big supporter of the Southwest Museum of the American Indian, which is now part of the archery.
And he was not an Indian.
A nice Sicilian boy.
When Iron Eyes Cody and Chief Tahachi were very active in trying to protect like indigenous actors within the film industry, and they created like the War Paint Club that went on to become like the I forget what the name of it is. If it's like the American Indian Actors Guild or something like that. But many of the core members were actually not Indian themselves. But I think so. Iron Eyes Cody, it's believed that like it was an open secret in Hollywood, and I think it was the same thing for Chief Tahachi. Because like his own son was, you know, I have a quote from his son saying that he would respond to people asking about his name as like, oh, it's Hollywood, everyone's a chief in Hollywood. So I think that it was an open secret, but he is still remembered in scholarship, and you know, if you look him up, he is remembered as an Indian, but he's remembered as a Cherokee, he's remembered as all these different tribes, just like whatever source they're looking at.
It's a long Southern California tradition of people coming here and inventing themselves, and, you know, petty nobles, and, I mean, he's not alone. There's a whole cast of characters like that.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great talk. So I want to mention to everybody that next month we're going to have Carla Bollinger, who gave a talk last year, and she is heavily historian of the Santa Susana area, and she's going to be talking about weapons and space rocket engine development testing at the historic Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Now, this has got to be a special talk. I mean, when you consider the Santa Susana area, this is really historic and scientific.
It'll
So
be
please,
nuclear.
yeah, it's going to go nuclear. So please, see you next month, and thank you very much for coming. Good night, everybody.